So we've heard today that deals are happening, there's money out there. So I guess the question now is how to access it. And one way of doing that, you could say, is to get inside the mind of a life science investor, which is the final panel for our day. So I would like to invite up Phil Masterson, Associate Director, Ventures at Cancer Research Horizons, and his panelists to the stage. Our session is also being sponsored by Cancer Research Horizons. Thank you. So over to Phil and his panelists.
Yes, please. Yeah. So we're going to finish at 6.
Yes. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Last panel of the day. Thank you very much for sticking with us. Our aim for this session is to, get inside the mind of a life science investor. We're actually going to spoil you today because actually we're going to meander through the heads of 5 leading investors and get their thoughts. And what we really want to do is understand their approach and their strategy for selecting the right deals. And I think it's a really important conversation to have, actually, because the investors you engage with and the relationships you establish with those investors, I think, can have a really significant impact on the trajectory of your company. So I think what we'll do is we'll start with some really quick fire introductions from the panel, and then we'll dive straight into the subject matter. I know these 40 minutes can fly by, and before you know it, I'll have Tony looming over me, I'm sure. So, right, why don't we kick off with the introductions? Anne, let's start with you at that end.
We're just the last ones between a drink and the panel. I'm Anne Horgan. I'm one of the partners at Cambridge Innovation Capital. We are a VC firm based in Cambridge, as the name suggests. We have over £500 million under management, and we have invested in over 40 companies, currently deploying our second fund, which is £225 million, in companies both in deep tech and life sciences, which have a link to the broad Cambridge ecosystem. And that means for us anything between London and Oxford.
Kerstin?
I'm next. So my name is Kerstin Papenfuss. I lead the pharma sector at Deep Science Ventures. Deep Science Ventures are a venture builder, and we start novel deep tech ventures from scratch. That means all the way from idea. So we are always on the hunt for problems to solve, and then we have an invention process in-house that leads to the idea that we then build novel ventures around. We work across climate, agri-tech, food tech, computation, and I lead the pharma sector. To date, we've created 46 startups. Most of them are still going, I think more than 40 actually. We've invested £9 million only into these startups, and the overall portfolio value by now is close to 500 million.
Thank you. Markus?
Hi, I'm Markus Dietrich from Hadean Ventures. Hadean Ventures is a European life science venture fund. We are headquartered in Norway, but also have offices in Sweden, Germany, Austria, so we are quite broadly across Europe. We have about 250 million euros under management and invested broadly in life science, so not only therapeutics, but also medical device, digital health, and diagnostics, and primarily Europe, but our mandate is actually worldwide.
I'm Jonathan Tobin. I'm a general partner with Branding Capital, and I'm also an investor in residence with Cancer Research Horizons. Branding Capital is a biotech VC headquartered in Australia. We have about $1.5 billion under management. We're investing from our 6th fund, and it's a mixture of Australian, European, US, seed, Series A, Series B, all in therapeutics.
Right, great to be here, Laura Lane. So I head up the Lilly Ventures team here in Europe. So Lilly Ventures is the corporate venture capital arm of Eli Lilly and Company. We do a number of things on the sort of investment front, one of which is that we invest into life science specialist funds. We have about sort of 25, 30 sort of formal relationships there and investments. We have about 2 billion under management for that. And we also invest in syndicated direct investments into biotech companies themselves. At the moment, we have about 40 companies in the portfolio. We've been doing this for about 20 years, but in the last, I guess, 5 years, it's rapidly accelerated. We also work very closely, of course, as a sort of strategic corporate investor with a number of the other aspects that we have to support, especially early stage biotechs, such as our sort of Lilly Gateway Labs colleagues, and also, of course, work very closely with our BD&L colleagues to sort of work with them, especially from Europe, where it's often quite difficult to navigate to exactly the right person in a large company. So we do a little bit of air traffic control and make sure that we can introduce people with the thoughtful details required.
Perfect, thank you. And I'm Phil Masterson. I head up the ventures team at Cancer Research Horizons. You can think of Horizons as the commercial arm of Cancer Research UK. And we're at the really early stage of investing, so we're finding really innovative oncology propositions. We have a seed fund that really acts as a catalyst for a much more holistic offering, I would say. We try to build ourselves up to a position where we're offering founders and founding teams with everything that they might need at that really early stage, other than having the great idea, clearly. So that's enough about me. Let's get into the subject matter. And I thought a nice place to start really would be something that I think a lot of founding teams maybe overlook quite reasonably, given everything that they got on their minds. But it's really around, what incentivizes investors. Maybe we can start there and explore. Really, it's about the incentive structure behind VC funding. And Jonathan, I'm going to come to you first on that.
Okay, well, different VCs have different incentive structures, but our firm is very traditional VC, 2 and 20 kind of, the usual. The investors, the investment professionals are aligned with the LPs. So, when you return all of the LPs' money plus the management fees, 20% of the profit goes to the general partners and the team that are doing the investments. And you obviously have to invest your own money in the fund so that you have, kind of, as they call it, skin in the game. You're aligned with the LPs. In our case, the LPs are pension funds. So that's kind of how you then have sort of alignment with the investments you do. It makes you focused when you're thinking about putting more money into a company. It also makes you more aligned with your colleagues, so there's less of a feeling that you have your own deals and they have their deals, and you don't care about their deals. You only care about your own deals. You sort of, everyone's in the same boat. Other firms obviously do things very differently. It's very different if you're in a corporate structure and so on. But in our sort of structure, one of the major risks, and people often don't understand the risks that the investors face, is fundraising. We have to raise money just like the companies have to raise money. And it's actually quite difficult to go to investors and say, give us $500 million to invest in stuff, just like a blind pool. When you're raising money for a biotech, you can at least show them what your company's done and what it's going to do. And so that is one of the biggest challenges as a general partner in a VC fund, which has been difficult over the last couple of years. I think we're lucky that we have access to the Australian pension market, which has been an amazing source of financial backing, and hopefully that will also be the case in the UK over the next few years.
What about fund lifetimes and the sort of the ticking clock nature of that, needing to see the upside? Is that impacting on your decisions?
Yeah, well, our funds have been 12 years, 12 plus 3. Most funds are 10 plus 2. The average length of a 10-year fund is 14 years. So if you do early stage investing, it does take a long time. And I think, 10 years is probably a little bit too short. But it is good to have the discipline. So the first couple of years you can do early stage investments. The second couple of years that you're deploying, you're probably looking at later stage investments. And then by the third and fourth year, you're thinking about raising the next fund so that you can be onto the next cycle. But where you are in that fund life cycle does dictate a little bit what sort of deals you're receptive to doing.
And Laura, from a corporate VC perspective, is it all about tapping external innovation? Is that uppermost in your mind?
That's certainly in mind. I was just going to pick up on what Jonathan said about 2 and 20. I wonder, I mean, you mentioned the 20%, the carried interest piece. The 2's a management fee, right? I was just like, I'm not sure everybody knows that, right? That's just like our own language that we get used to. And it's like, if you don't know that, well, ask us afterwards. Too much VC jargon. So on the corporate side, the remuneration side of things is pretty different. It's more sort of corporate standard in terms of, share long-term incentives and bonuses and salary, those sorts of things. So it's a very sort of I guess a more kind of more ordinary kind of remuneration. But really what we're doing in corporate is trying to, so there's also different flavors of this, and you get some corporate investors that try and do things that are completely off strategy from what their kind of parent organization is doing. In Lilly, we're very conscious of the enterprise. We're not actually, Lilly Ventures is not a separate, arm's length organization. You sign a CDO with Eli Lilly and Company. We're a department essentially within the company. If we want to make investments, or we either in funds or in companies, we take that to our investment committee each time there is a round or a fund closing, and each time we have to go to Treasury and ask for that money. We don't have a sort of designated pot sitting for that. We obviously have a forecast, and we say we think we're going to do 10 to 15 this year, and we think we're going to need X amount of dollars. And we have the forecast for that, and more or less it's usually as we expect, but it's not a sort of a designated pot. So we look at everything, at every funding moment. But in terms of why we typically do it, I think there are a few things. So it is about sort of fingers on the pulse. It's about the new substrate. It's about, we know that investors who are backing, especially, founding or seeding or building or Series A type companies, they're going to be, really at that sort of coal face of like seeing the early things come in. And if we're working closely with them and we're syndicating and investing, then, we have that kind of relationship equity to kind of get close to the new companies. The thing that like my team really love is that you come across a company you've never met before. That's perfect. If you see a company you've seen like 5 or 6 times, you're like, oh, we should see what the update is, but it's never as exciting as, oh, that's new. So we like new things. So that tip of the spear for like where things are breaking in biology and chemistry and new modalities, I think is super important for us. And I think also the other thing to really not forget, because it's really important, is that we are of course conscious that the enterprise we work for ultimately has a pipeline. Over 60% of the medicines launched in the last 10 years, which I think is total, just 23 have come from external partners. So we know that biotech and smaller companies are incredibly important to that kind of journey of new medicines approved and those medicines getting to patients. And those conversations don't start at like some late stage clinical milestone. It's a long journey of discussion and getting to know those different technologies, and we follow that science in those companies for a long time. So pipeline impact is super important, but you don't start off having that discussion when things are just getting going and thinking, right, this is definitely going to be a deal. But you follow it, and you learn, and you work together sometimes along the way. And so I think that piece of like tip of the spear, getting us into new breaking areas, as well as also thinking, well, there's going to be a small number, but an important number that now also has pipeline impact, that we're serving both those masters.
Very good. Okay, thank you. I think I'm going to move on to the next question. Really get inside the investor pitch meeting. Let's kind of picture ourselves there. And Anne, maybe I'll come to you first on this one. What are investors thinking? What are the questions they're asking themselves and the founding teams that are pitching in front of them? Maybe you start us off on that.
Very happy to, and perhaps I'll just piggyback on Laura's point about being in a very privileged position and perhaps seeing a founding team and a company for the first time. So I'm not talking here about seeing the updates. It's always great to catch up with teams that we know and see what's been achieved in the time we haven't seen them. But here I'm talking about a brand new opportunity, if you like. And it's the first time we see this team. And of course, they're probably wondering, what are we thinking about? So there's perhaps 4 different pillars to pick on here. The first one is, as Jonathan mentioned earlier, we are financial investors. So we are here to make a return for our investors. So of course, one of the questions is, sounds great, can I make a big return on investment here? That's one bracket. The other one is, of course, a lot of people in our field are scientists or medics. So of course we get hooked by the technology, by the science. That's another big piece. But it's always thinking, what's the glimmer of greatness here? Are we addressing a need? Is there really a need here? Is this disruptive? So that's the kind of questions around more the technology and the applications of the technology. The third part, I'd say, is probably around the risks. We talked about this a little bit as well. We always try to think about the risks and whether we can mitigate the risks, and if there's a plan, and if that financial round, which is being put forward, will address some of these risks and we can progress on the trajectory. And I think the fourth one, I'll pick on what Nara said earlier in the previous session. It's also about the people. So what goes in my mind when I see a founding team for the first time is, actually, can I work with these guys for 5 years, 7 years, 10 years? You know, is there chemistry there? Is there some common ground? Is there something that I want to work towards and develop that relationship and make this potential opportunity a great one? Perhaps I'll pause there because there's quite a bit to unpack otherwise.
Thank you, Anne. Kerstin, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, we obviously look at all the usual suspects that you usually want to display on your pitch deck, right? The problem that you're solving, the way you're solving this, and how you're going to make money doing that. But what I'm always really keen on elucidating, especially with early stage startups, is the team and what the team brings to it. And often you have these team slides where like, okay, I'm an expert in this and my co-founder is a technical expert in this, and together we're just going to work and everything is going to work out. But I think that's just half of it, really, right? Because for an early stage startup, you need to be having somebody who is absolutely magnetic that can get other people to kind of follow them on their big vision, right? They need to be thinking big. They need to be super concise in how they're communicating, to be magnetic to other people, to want to join the team for probably really bad money. They need to be able to attract investment. So I usually like really focus on what's this entrepreneur like? Would I follow him? And also what's the kind of learning capabilities of these folks, right? If they're just coming out of a scientific role, how much trust do I have that they can pick up all these other skills in a short amount of time? How resilient are they? And those are things that are usually not really touched upon in pitches. So I always try to find out other ways.
Any other comments from the panel on that?
Yeah,
Markus?
I think I would also say, what investors hate is risk that could be mitigated, that being financing. So, I mean, don't be too optimistic on the amount of money you need, because, yes, refinancing is always much more difficult. And if there's any de-risking in type of the mechanism of action you're using or a technology you're developing, point that out, because de-risking is what investors really love.
Fantastic. I haven't heard anything about portfolio construction and balance. Is that an important one? Jonathan, you're smiling. Is that a point you think
it's
about?
very important. I think, the job of a VC ultimately is an asset manager. And so you are managing other people's money. You need to create a portfolio that has some balance in risk. That means not everything super early, super high risk. It means not everything in one modality or therapeutic area. So there's a temptation, I suppose, once you've built up some expertise in a particular area, to kind of do lots more deals in that area. And there is some validity in doing that, especially if you have a very large fund. But you want to create a portfolio of kind of 12 to 15 companies is like the sweet spot, regardless of how big the fund is. And you want to have some kind of diversity across all those different criteria. One thing I think we also do in my firm is we have diversity on geography. So we tend to do the early stuff in Australia, where we essentially have pretty much monopoly on the kind of early stage ideas. And then the European investments are a lot more mature. So we kind of hedge some of that geographical and stage risk that way.
I think I would just add a little bit on that with, we see with our sort of fund of fund investments as well. So, you know, we invest in, well, not actually any of the ones here. What a shame.
We
But
can remedy that,
we
Laura.
we should have the discussion. I think I dropped myself in that. But you also get, you know, we really like the early stage in terms of investing in funds that do the founding, the company building, the seed, the A. But, you know, also what we're seeing is with, used to be that fund manager would have like you know, often just like a sort of, you know, a main fund, the fund. And they would have various vintages. And now we're also seeing the emergence of sort of new fund managers, which I think is really interesting and great for the space in general. But we're also seeing perhaps some of the more established players have slightly more of a kind of portfolio of funds. So something that focuses on like company creation, or something that's their main fund, or maybe it's a growth or a crossover fund, to try and sort of catch companies like across the kind of whole spectrum. So I think that's a kind of interesting innovation that we've sort of seen in the space. I'm not sure, you know, I think we still kind of remains to be seen how productive and sort of financially that those are. So we're sort of, you know, waiting and seeing, because it's sort of a bit early to know exactly how that all plays out. But I think that's also a sort of an interesting kind of innovation in the kind of investor landscape.
Great. Okay. Well, given all those considerations, how do companies get themselves business ready? You know, differentiate, stand out from the crowd. And I think there are different elements of this. Maybe Markus, you could kick us off on that first bit of finding the right investors for you and how you engage them.
Yeah, so I mean, as a company, you kind of need to also do your homework, and I mean, you can consider nearly that first reach out. It's nearly like a job application. All investors, I think, see more opportunities than they can kind of work with at any given time. So you need to find your way to stand out, similar than for a job application process. I mean, something should make you stand out, and that's why I think also that if you're reaching out the first time, I mean, first of all, do your homework. Is it the right stage? Look at your portfolio. If they have something very similar, maybe even a competitor of yours, the likelihood you get an investment from them, I think, is close to zero for obvious reasons. So find the right match for your technology and stage, and then really like also have a very good first intro email where you highlight kind of what's unique, why are you potentially best in class, first in class, kind of why you stand out, because that's what needs to also grab the attention of the person reviewing it initially to maybe get you also a quicker feedback, because I don't think any investor has a lack of opportunities. It's more finding the right ones and seeing them early enough.
Can I add something to this? Is that okay?
Sure, go for it, Anne.
I think one of the things as well which can help a team stand out is if they manage to get a warm introduction.
Mm-hmm.
And there's as you were saying, you know, we don't like opportunities that tend to come thick and fast. But if something lands in one's inbox and it's coming from someone we trust, there's already that bias that, hey, I want to read that email. You know, it's so and so. I know them really well. I trust them. I'm certainly gonna take a look very quickly, rather than it being at the, you know, on my to-do list, but somewhere, you know, in the middle of the to-do list. So I think that warm intro can really be quite helpful, and it can be really hard if it's a first-time founding team and there's no obvious connections. But actually, that's where LinkedIn's come in trumps, and there's always a connection somewhere, right? Even if it's not the first connection, maybe a second connection, and it's that human aspect, that people aspect, which is so crucial in our business. And in my mind, that's the first step of someone being very proactive. Maybe they don't have a connection to me, but they'll reach out to their network, or they'll try to figure out a way to get to me in a manner that I'm going to pay attention. And there are various networks and groups, and it might be, I'm going to be biased here, but you know, they tend to be ladies' networks as well. That can be helpful. They can be sort of geographic founders network. That can be helpful. So there's always loads of ways. It takes a bit of time. It takes a bit of effort, but it can really pay off.
I think the commonest, following on from Anne's point, the commonest mistake people make when they're pitching to VCs is they just dive in immediately with the pitch. And like most VCs are kind of inundated with these kinds of things, and you immediately switch off. And what works better is to kind of get to know the individual, so you develop some sort of rapport, relationship, trust, etc. And then it's much more organic than just kind of always being bombarded with the hard sell, like from before you even know what the person's name is, kind of thing.
I think the other thing I would just say, so I've sat on the a few different sides of this. So I've sat on the investor side, the corporate side, the pitching for money side, and raise money. And I think this is exactly like, you just need to get through the door, but you need someone to open that door for you. And I actually raised money when I was back in the day, I was on the younger end of the spectrum. Thankfully now there's more people that are doing this, but surrounding yourself with a kind of network, an informal network of mentors and advisors and people you can kind of rely on, because it's about pressure testing your storytelling, which is kind of crucial, and that storytelling develops and iterates as you develop that relation equity with the investors. Because also what you want is someone to jump onto the side of the fence that you're on and be on your team, and people are only going to want to be on your team and if they think that it's a relationship they can add to and that they can contribute to and that you're going to do this together. So it's about sort of trying to recruit that future team, which is your sort of network of investors. And so it's a bit like doing an interview for university. Like, you need to be teachable, you need to listen, you need to kind of work the plan out together. And so I think it's quite a lot of the same psychology to interviewing for that job or getting money. It's not you're not pitching. It's not. The term pitch deck is like actually a terrible term, isn't it? It's actually, you're not really selling in a sense. You're trying to find your tribe.
Dragon's Den has kind of totally given people the wrong end of the stick on how to behave.
And we're not very dragon-like, are we? I mean, really, come on.
Exactly.
Speak for yourself.
I think there are some great points there, and I was going to say the real limitations around that spray and pray approach. And you'd be surprised how many founding teams do that and aren't successful. But let's move on. Say you've identified the investors. How do you give your best? How do you get the best chance of getting traction there, Kerstin? Maybe you could kick us off on that. Things that you should be doing once you've engaged.
I think definitely have all your ducks in a row, right? So it's like you finally manage to get that pitch meeting with the investor of your choice, and then you don't have your follow-up material ready, and they ask you for access to the data room, which you're still frantically building behind the scenes. That never really goes down well. So I would make sure that before I have that pitch meeting, I definitely have all the follow-up materials already ready. And I know building a startup is building a plane as you're flying it, but that is really important, right? If you have somebody's attention, then you want to be able to keep it, right? And I think also, this kind of being professional and personable thing is definitely worthwhile. I mean, I do raise quite a lot of money myself to keep DSV operating, and I have raised most of the money actually without any decks, right? Just kind of telling the story and getting people engaged with the model. So whilst you have to have all the materials, I think it's a kind of human connection bit, find out where the hook is, and test your story out, with people that are friendly to you. And use other people's social capital, and that's what I call it, right? Social capital. Make sure that if somebody introduces you to somebody, really do follow up. Otherwise, they won't do it again. All these being professional things.
Markus or Anne, do you want to
pick up on the story bit, because we never think about that as much as we should. And I think a lot of founders we encounter in our field are scientists, right? So we think data, we think science, and very often the story is missing. The numbers of pitch sessions I've been to where someone dives straight into a really complex cancer biology pathways and tries to explain to me how great this molecule is and why. And there's no stepping back, trying to get me into the story as in, this is the whole general landscape and walk me through. And they don't quite realize I've probably been seen already 2 or 3 on the day on something completely different. It's that storytelling which really put teams apart. And I think that's that human component, but also understanding from the other side of the table, okay, this person's not a cancer biology expert. Let me take them through and let me take you through your story, but also let me show you the vision I have for the company. I'm not just trying to develop a small molecule that benefit patients. Of course, we'll want to see that. But the story is more, hey, you know what? I'm building the next Amgen right here in the UK. That grabs my attention. So there's that storytelling which quite often gets overlooked because it's a bit fluffy, but it's an integral part of putting your best foot forward, in my mind.
Anyone else?
I would say so. I always do like I mean, this is a very sort of, I guess, a British analogy, but I do always like the sort of the early learning center, like as you're sort of diving deep, that you get the sort of early learning center like first summary, just to kind of ground you in kind of what it really is. because I think so often it does go into something super complex straight away. Now, you don't probably need to educate your investors on like cancer's an important thing, or, you know, often like you have that first slide on like epidemiology and like this is the prevalence. Like normally that stuff like pretty well understood. You know, if you're in a rare disease and again there's a big education piece, then sure, important. But, you know, to allow people to sort of take 1 or 2 steps down into the science so that you don't kind of just lose people straight away, like give that context. I think the other thing I would say about is also to listen and iterate. You know, try to really like reading the room, like really reading the room. I don't mean like, oh, I think that went really well, when actually it didn't. Listen to the questions, write down the questions you get asked, think about the answers you give, iterate those. You know, perhaps test some of those answers with other people beforehand, I think is really important. And when you get feedback, trying to understand what the feedback really is. Like, I think you get these different forms of no's from investors, which like, they're not written as no's, but they are no's, and just trying to extract out of that what they're really saying so that you can then adapt and respond, and also ask questions, like a bit more of a Socratic method in terms of, you know, I guess the classic I always give is like platform versus assets. Like, make sure you weave into the conversation before you sort of settle down for the pitch, like what's the focus of the fund, what are you kind of interested in? Because if you can be a platform company or an asset company. I mean, we've both given both of those pitches, you know, on probably the same day for the same company. But if you don't know who your audience is and what's kind of like jives for them at a particular time, you could just do the wrong pitch, whereas the other pitch with a slightly different story would have totally landed. And at the end of the day, when you're raising money, you need to raise the money, and the story won't always work for everybody. You just need it to work for enough people. So that kind of asking, what are you interested in? So you can give the right pitch, and you can have your 10 different pitches, which are essentially for the same development program, but you've just met and match-made that story.
Yeah. I think also another thing to keep in mind, like in this meeting, I mean, try to be as open as you can. I mean, it doesn't help investors if every third slide says to be shared under NDA or confidential data, because I mean, what should we do then with the information and how you gauge interest? So try to share as much as you feel comfortable, because also we are not having the time to take your data and develop a competing drug anyways.
Most people think it's like the VC is buying and the company's selling, and the truth is that it should be a two-way transaction. And the good companies that you actually want to invest in are often in excess demand, oversubscribed, whatever they put on the press release. And you're, you know, as an investor, I sort of feel like I should be selling as much as the company's selling, and, you know, vice versa. So I like it when companies ask deep questions about us as investors, how we work, you know, our track record, all that kind of thing, and also do their own diligence on the investors, because they should. And if a deal is really good, you know, because most investors think in a similar-ish way, there will be a lot of other investors who are interested. So you have to kind of compete with them.
Fantastic. We should move on in the interest of time, and maybe, well, I'll just open this up. Maybe to the extent we haven't covered it, the things to absolutely avoid. You know, we talked about stuff you should be doing. Markus, anything stand out for you in terms of the big mistakes to avoid?
I mean, yes, as touched about, like being super secretive, or I mean, we have no problem signing NDAs, but don't make the whole process more complicated than it needs to be. If the investor has a standard, try to accept it, unless you really see a problem with that can be discussed. So I mean, just to some extent, it is important to be in a way accommodating, because that, as said, we are also assessing, do we feel comfortable working with these founders for like the next 3 to 5 years? Also, we all know there will be problems on the way that need to be solved. So it's good to then see that there is also a certain flexibility to, wanting to also come together for a situation. I mean, whenever these problems arise, let it be delays, more money needed. I mean, yes, there are different incentives between an investor and a founder, but you always need to find the middle way. So it's a give and take in a way.
Any other quick mistakes to avoid?
With you.
go for it.
Yeah, I
now.
had a funny one actually that happened a while back, and I was a bit incredulous. But one of the mistakes to avoid is making sure. Well, the mistake is not talking to each other as founders or as execs in the company before you go and speak to a VC. And that happened to me in a very unpleasant way, where clearly there was a misalignment between the CEO and the CSO. And that came out during the meeting, that they were talking with each other and contradicting each other. That didn't fill us with a lot of confidence, let's put it this way. So that was a very quick way, after 10, 15 minutes. Clearly they had something which was unresolved that should have been done behind closed doors. But that was the nail in the coffin before they even started to tell us about the story and the company. So again, the human aspect, right? But the other way around, going back to your first question about the good things, I've seen some teams which you could tell worked amazingly well. And it was not about the CEO being the person taking center stage. It was that person taking some questions, passing it on, keeping control of the meeting. And that, again, the other way around, you don't listen to the full story thinking, wow, that's an impressive team. And that always already puts the company head and shoulders above many of the other pitches you see.
Yeah, I also have a funny anecdote to share. I think it's always good to have like a very good filter between what is like persistence and when it becomes like the awkward end of persistence, right? If you're like speaking in a panel and then sometimes you come off the panel and there's like 10 people queuing up to want to speak to you. And I was at a conference and then had this lady that actually followed me to lunch, and I sat there with my friend that I was having lunch with, and she stood right next to my table, waiting for me to finish my lunch to be able to speak to me, and then actually followed me in the toilet. That's the wrong end of persistence.
Okay, yes. You shouldn't really need to say that one, I don't think. But
The biggest mistake I've seen is people not assuming or not realizing that VCs all talk to each other like we're creatures of gossip. Which is where the deal flow generally comes from, and so you get companies that come and tell you they've got a term sheet, or they, this VC is really interested, or they're going to lead the round or whatever. Like you really can't get away with that. And I've actually seen companies, including in our own portfolio, actually, that have like naively gone and sort of oversold to investors, and it is a surefire way to fail.
Yeah,
I
I guess the right level of tenacity and transparency.
Yeah, and I think on that as well, I mean, don't try to approach several people in the same fund independent of each other. We, especially inside the same fund, we talk with each other.
Yeah, I think
find your internal champion and stick to that person.
And we actually see that a lot in pharma as well. I mean, it's actually a much bigger problem for us, is that you sort of give. So often we have, you have a tsunami of opportunities. It's actually like my email's a car crash. I mean, I'll be totally frank about it. But, we do try and get back to people with a little bit with some feedback, which might not be like, it's not going to be a thesis. It's going to be short and sweet and the stuff that's top of mind. But we do try to do that. And I have seen more recently, I think maybe just because it's a slightly complicated, it's a difficult market to fundraise in, especially if you're kind of early, that then you sort of provide this feedback and then someone comes back saying, oh, here's a load more data to like, basically you're wrong. And I'm like, it's not really about being wrong or right at this point. Like, this is the feedback, I'm not, when someone's telling me, you're wrong and here's all this thing to justify my position, you're getting some feedback, but I'm not writing a thesis and giving you the whole. I just don't. Unfortunately, like there's not really the time to do that. So I think really just what you're trying to do is also preserve that relationship for really coming back when, if you've been told, in vivo POC or something else, like we really mean it. Like, don't try and just give me some extra bits that you think is going to maybe get me a little closer, because it's not. So I think, take the no's, take the advice. Tenacity is really important, but just, make sure it's sort of completely well guided.
I can see the panel are really warming up to the mistakes topic, aren't they? But let's we're going to run out of time, I'm afraid, and I knew this would happen. But we're not going to get to the deal and the deal making bit, I'm afraid. But maybe just in the last 2 minutes, quick takeaway, high level takeaways, maybe one from each of you in 10 or 20 seconds. Takeaways for founding teams.
Me.
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I wasn't sure which way around you were going to start.
Listen, it's anything goes at this point. Go. 1 minute.
I think takeaway for me is that I think being in an investor is an incredibly privileged position. We tend to see fabulous science. We tend to see fabulous human beings, and we see a lot of well put together tenacity, but I would perhaps call that more resilience. And what my take-home message is if you're a founder, if you're an exec in a company, don't be afraid to come and have a chat. You don't have to pitch, you don't have to sell. Come and have a chat. We're human beings. We like what we do. We like the interaction. We're excited by the science. And more often, people will say, don't ask for advice and you may get money.
Great. Who wants to go next?
I'll go on. So I think for me, it's really about building that network of support, that group of mentors or sponsors that are sort of informally connected to kind of get you where you really need to be, and also to like pressure test everything.
Perfect. Jonathan?
Yeah, I think if you want to, start a biotech company that's developing drugs, you really have to think about the potentially several $100 million journey that it takes. And the first sort of seed round is like the tip of the iceberg. And that might mean in some cases that you don't want to do it, but you've got to bear that in mind, that it is a very long and expensive journey if you're successful.
Okay, quickly from Kerstin and Markus.
Yeah. I mean, we do work a lot with different founders, and I always find the one that come to you with a certain amount of energy that kind of drag you out of what you've been doing and kind of take you along the journey a little bit. Those are the ones that I actually do want to help. So I think being high energy through the process will get you quite a long way.
Perfect. Markus?
Yeah, and I think also we haven't touched on the deal, but let's say you landed your investors, you closed your funding round. This is not the end, that's the beginning. And basically you will go out and start fundraising again.
Perfect. Well, I need to bring this session to a close. Thank you all very much for listening. Hopefully that was useful, and great insights from the panel. Thank you all very much. Yep.